Hello, welcome to another edition of 1036, our monthly news magazine program here on Milwaukee PBS. I'm your host, Portia Young. In this edition, we welcome a very special guest, someone who is used to asking the questions on her own public affairs show, Margaret Hoover, political commentator and host of Firing Line on PBS. Margaret Hoover joins me now. Welcome to Milwaukee and welcome to Milwaukee PBS.
Portia, thank you very much for having me. It has been so fun to be here.
I hope that the city has been good to you. It's a little chilly outside.
So far, so good.
Okay. Well, I want to just talk about the show because you became host of Firing Line in 2018, following in some very big footsteps. William F. Buckley, he was the political commentator and conservative, basically stalwart. How was it following in those footsteps, and why did you want to take that on?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. Mm-hmm. William F. Buckley Jr. was the longest running host of a television program, a television program that ran 33 years, 1966 to 1999. And nobody has hosted a television show that long in television history. Johnny Carson didn't host The Tonight Show as long as William F. Buckley Jr. hosted Firing Line. And what I felt was that in the context, I've been a political commentator and I've been on television talking about politics really since about 2007. So, you know, it was coming up on more than 10 years, but I was beginning to feel increasingly like we weren't getting at the ideas that were most important to people when we're talking about the horse race of politics. And I'm somebody who, while I love politics and I like the horse race of politics, I actually care about solving problems in our country. Mm-hmm. And I'm really interested in policy, and I'm really interested in ideas and people who are interested in finding pragmatic solutions to solve our country's ills. Mm-hmm. And so the theme of Firing Line was a contest of ideas. And one of the things we also find, I think, is that our politics and our media have become hyper-polarized. Mm-hmm. There is a hyper-partisanship that has bled into the way we talk about politics on television. And so in a weird way, what was old could be new again. Just sitting down with somebody for 30 minutes in a long-form, extended exchange of ideas that's civil, but still a contest that is sometimes the people you agree with and sometimes people you don't agree with, but that you can respect the person who shows up and respect them enough to really engage their ideas. And so, frankly, I thought Buckley had, in that context, a perfect pedigree. And so it sort of developed from that. Now, a few other twists and turns along the way that allowed us to be able to call it Firing Line and all these other things. And certainly, you know, to be clear, nobody's trying to be Bill Buckley. Exactly. Nobody's trying to be William F. Buckley. Right. I certainly, me least of all. But look, I think the legacy that Buckley bequeathed us is one that deserves to be played forward in our contemporary debates, probably now more than ever.
Right, and on that note, PBS said that the relaunch of Firing Line came at like just the right time, when the discourse needed to be elevated and become meaningful discourse. Can you speak more about that and why it was just like lightning in a bottle right then?
Well, look, I mean, I think we look around and you see people siloing themselves into media echo chambers. It's a very easy thing to self-select into the cable news channel that is going to reinforce your perspective and your worldview. And oftentimes, you know, people who come to PBS are the kind of people who are going to turn to the channel they disagree with too, because they want their views challenged. And they're an informed audience. And I think what we've seen over the last 20 years, 30 years, I mean, since William F. Buckley has been off the air in 1999, is an increasing partisanship and hyperpolarization in our media. Mm-hmm. And I think a time where people can take an idea and unpack it and just sit down and engage with each other. I mean, I think that's one of the things we're not doing anymore. We're seeing these split screens, mm-hmm. or split screams, as people have called it before, right? Where you have this person on this side and this person on that side, and you can almost predict their talking points. Mm-hmm. We wanted to be the antidote to that. And I think we all know now is the time to do that because there's nowhere else doing what we're doing, except for you and I right now.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about you a little bit. Your great-grandfather was former President Herbert Hoover. You served in the White House under George W. Bush, the administration there. You worked on his re-election campaign in 2004. You've been a political contributor to CNN and Fox News, so you've seen both sides there. You're well-versed in politics, we know. How do you assess this current White House and the current administration?
There's a word that it almost feels cliche. It is cliche, it's totally cliche, but this is totally unprecedented. It's a completely, and I say it's, CNN had a whole aftermath of the 2016 election, and I think they even created a book called Unprecedented, and they had people write blurbs about everything about the way this president operates, the way he engages with his counterparts, the way he engages the office, the way he approaches the office is very unprecedented. And as somebody who worked in a White House, but then was also imbued in my acculturation and growing up with a really deep sense of reverence for people who enter public service. And I mean public service in the most sincere and earnest way. I mean, my great-grandfather always believed that, he said, being a politician was a poor profession, being a public servant was a noble profession, or a noble one. Politics shouldn't be a profession, right? It should be something that people who have developed a set of skills then offer those skills to the public. I mean, that was the essence of a representative democracy, is that you are participating in you're part of the community, and then you serve the community in a different way, and then you go back to participating in the community. And many of those values that I grew up with and was raised with, are hard to see and identify with in the current White House, in the current iteration. So I wanted to be part of a solution in our civic life, which is talking about the ideas that are going to fix the problems, I think. Because I don't think that Donald Trump is the problem. I think he is representative of a systemic problem that we have. There's a lot of hyperpolarization and hyperpartisanship that I've talked about, and I think that he has come out of that. I think he is symptomatic of a larger sickness that we have in our politics.
With that, fake news, the quote-unquote fake news, how does that shape what you were trying to do on Firing Line? This world that we now live in with this phrase that's just thrown out there.
It's interesting. I have recently, one of the programs I recently filmed was a program with Senator Mark Warner, who is the senior senator from Virginia, and also the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, along with Richard Burr, a Republican from North Carolina. And they've released a couple of intelligence volumes about the incursion from Russian interference in our elections in 2020. And the most recent one was about a social disinformation campaign and the social media disinformation campaigns that the Russians advanced in a highly sophisticated and targeted way across the country. And that was fake news, right? What the Russians were essentially doing was having people, 400 people, employed by this internet research agency, which was a Putin-adjacent organization, that was creating fake news stories and pushing them out, which spread at a rate 3 times faster than actual news stories in the 3 months leading up to the election in 2016. What's interesting about the term fake news, as we know, is that the president has then weaponized it in his defensiveness about Russians intruding in our elections in 2016, and starts calling any news that he dislikes fake news. Now it's become a term that sort of everybody uses to point to the other side for news stories that they don't like. And what's shocking about the way the president weaponizes language or markets language is that, we all have just come to use it colloquially. Anytime there's, some misinformation is passed on to me, I call it fake news. Just as in passing, because it's so seeped into how we talk about it. At Firing Line, we try to be the antidote. There's no, everything is true that it comes on Firing Line. It's fact checked. We literally have fact checkers have to cite from 2 or 3 sources everything that's on, that airs on the program. And then further to that, we don't do talking points. Somebody can't come on and give me, first of all, I'm not going to engage with somebody who's going to come on and just do talking points. I'm engaging with people. The guests are people who have ideas, who want to engage in a real back and forth about ideas.
So let's talk about the importance of public television in able to be that channel where there are no talking points. So what is the importance, and is it even more relevant today than it ever has
Look,
been?
I mean, the thing that's so extraordinary about PBS is that it is the most trusted news source in America. So in a way, I mean, people come to PBS and they know they're not getting fake news. They're not getting talking points. They're getting things that have been fact-checked fastidiously, because they have to be. You know the standards here. Everybody knows that things that show up on public airways, I mean, there's enough lawyers to make sure that we have to get it right. But we also have to hold ourselves to that, keep that standard alive, so that we continue to earn the trust of the audience.
What I've been struck about my tenure here at PBS is you get time. It's not driven by the clock, you know, where oh yeah, we're out of time, but sorry, you can't finish your discourse on, you know, this epidemic right now because, oh, we got to go to commercial. You know, I think that's part of it too.
I'm so glad you raised that. The way we're going back and forth here, on firing line, I can ask somebody a question and they can give me an answer. And maybe that first answer is a little talking pointy. So then I can go back and say, but let me ask you about it. And I can go back and back and back and ask a follow-up, and then a follow to the follow-up, and then a follow to the follow-up, and we can really get at something.
Well, you follow in the footsteps, again, of William F. Buckley Jr. and the conservative movement. In your assessment, how is it today? And how will it evolve, perhaps, to appeal to younger voters?
Yeah, so funny you ask. I think that the modern American conservative movement of William F. Buckley Jr. is incredibly diminished, fractured, and fragmented in a way that only very small elements of it represent the ideas that Buckley represented. It has become largely, at this point, a populist movement that has nativist elements in it that, frankly, you know, as a person who came up sort of identifying with some of the many of the themes and pillars of conservatism, I don't see in the people who in the national landscape who call themselves conservative.
What are those pillars?
The main pillars of the modern American conservative movement, if you're of Buckley, right, it was an economic libertarianism. There was anti-communism was really that pillar, and it sort of morphed in the Reagan era as sort of representing a strong national defense or a strong America vis-a-vis the world. But that was really in the context of communism, right? This is before the wall fell. And then there was in the early iteration, the 1955 modern American conservative movement, a thing that Buckley referred to as sort of his traditionalism, right? And that didn't manifest itself around the social issues that are contemporary, like abortion or gay rights. Those weren't issues in the 1950s when the early modern American conservative movement was forming. But they were issues about sort of the role of religion and secular society, and how are we going to navigate a modernizing world with still, you know, keeping a sense of traditionalism as sort of spiritual guideposts. That was the context of the early movement. And really, while it morphed and it grew into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, I believe that since the Berlin Wall fell, the conservative movement hasn't had the cohesiveness that it had in those days. And it's fractured, fragmented, and fallen apart and wound itself around special interests that aren't necessarily ideas-driven. And again, you know, we know what William F. Buckley Jr. thought of Donald Trump because he wrote a column about Donald Trump. He thought he was an enormous narcissist, and he thought, he said, he had a line that was fabulous. I'm going to paraphrase because I won't get it exactly right. He said, if he looked a little, he thinks so highly of himself. If he looked a little different, he would put himself forward for Miss America or for the Miss Universe contest. So, you know, we don't have to guess what he would have thought about the current president, but I think he'd be disappointed in the lack of new ideas that the conservative movement has generated since his passing.
That appeal to young voters? Is it?
It doesn't. It just
Will
doesn't.
It?
No, look.
Is it dead?
Portia, I will tell you, I wrote a book 10 years ago, more than that, about how the Republican Party was going to lose millennials if they didn't get their act together quickly. Because I saw that millennials made basically the difference in the election of Barack Obama. And I realized that if Republicans didn't figure it out, modernize on some key issues, not just social issues like LGBT equality, immigration, climate change, healthcare, then they were going to be lost, a lost cause. And sadly, they didn't take the note. And I think the millennials are lost. I don't know that the Republican Party will be able to regenerate itself. By the way, I'm not saying the conservative movement. I'm saying the Republican Party. I don't know if this party is ever going to identify, certainly not to millennials or the generation below it. There's just too much brand damage. These kids don't self-identify with any party because they don't believe they have to identify with a party. So I think if we're going to continue to be a two-party system, it's going to take a radical transformation that I just can't even imagine on the right. Or maybe there's an opportunity for a new party.
And with that, you said the social issues are kind of the brand damage. Is it because of gay rights? You are a supporter of LGBTQ issues and.
Yeah, no, I've been look, there was a time in the modern American conservative movement where social issues weren't nearly the central organizing pillar. And look, I mean, people forget that Barry Goldwater's family was a family that helped bring Planned Parenthood to Arizona. Barry Goldwater, towards the end of his life, said you don't have to be straight to shoot straight, right? Barry Goldwater, we remember, wrote the book The Conscience of a Conservative, which was actually ghostwritten by William F. Buckley Jr. So if anybody next to Buckley was considered the political leading light of the conservative movement, it's Barry Goldwater, who was not a social conservative, because there was this strain of Western conservatism. And I was raised in Colorado. My dad always said, we're Western conservatives. I didn't really know what that meant, but there is a tradition of a social libertarianism in the conservative movement that I very much identify with. And look, I also, as a center-right person, believe that everybody has to have an equal playing field if you're going to be able to compete and live and take advantage of the laws and the opportunities in this country. You don't have an even playing field if you can be fired in 28 states for being gay or LGBT. And you can be fired in 28 states for being LGBTQ. And so that's just not an even playing field. I think there's a very consistent conservative argument that's consistent with some of the arguments that people make for conservatism and equal opportunity and individualism to extend to LGBT. I mean, of course it should extend to LGBT people. They're American. And so I've always been an advocate. I've never seen why the party didn't support LGBT equality if it believed in equal opportunity for everybody. And it was just a fundamental inconsistency that I never understood. And there are other conservatives like me, a lot of Republicans who, especially since the marriage was affirmed by the Supreme Court, we've seen many states start to pass really punitive laws, mostly red states, against LGBT people in their states. But it's red states where this is happening, but it's also Republicans who have been pushing back and sort of preventing some of the most onerous bills from becoming laws. Republican governors who have not signed off on Religious Freedom Restoration Acts or have vetoed them, or who have Republican legislators who have worked to kill some of the more onerous bills. So there is, especially at the state level, we see a real divide between Republicans on the social issues, especially LGBT equality. So most people think that Republicans are anti-LGBT equality, and I think in some ways quite an unfair characterization.
You're here in Milwaukee, which is ground zero for, I would say, perhaps the political universe. It seems like it was Florida, Florida, Florida back in the day. Now it's Wisconsin, Wisconsin, Wisconsin. We have 10 electoral votes. The Democratic National Convention is coming here, the first time in a generation that they've chosen a Midwestern city. How do you assess, what is your assessment of that move of the DNC to choose to be in our city? And how do you think it's going to go if you had a crystal ball?
Well, I mean, maybe one of the biggest mistakes of 2016 was not more Democratic attention was paid to this city in particular. And it was a surprise, I think, to everyone, including everyone in the Republican Party, including President Trump, that he won Wisconsin. 78,000 votes in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, made the difference. So I think it's a very astute move for the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, and all to come here. Now, it remains to be seen how well they treat the city. It seems to me the city is going to be so stressed at the gills from having to accommodate the DNC. They better treat y'all nicely if they hope that you all are all going to turn out when it comes to November. But in some ways, there was no other choice.
But why Wisconsin, though? I mean,
no,
we're
it's
up
still
against
going to be a
Houston.
battleground. You have seen, Houston. I mean,
Houston, Florida, we beat out Miami, Houston. Why Wisconsin and why Milwaukee in your assessment?
Well, I'm no Democratic strategist. I'm no Democratic Party strategist, but though there, some 10,000 votes in Milwaukee could have made a significant difference in the 2016 election. It seems to me Democrats don't want to make that mistake again. By the way, this is still going to be a battleground state. It seems to me. I mean, the Republicans. You all know this better than I do. Republicans have won statewide elections recently, and so it's going to be a turnout game. And it seems to me that Democrats don't want to make the same mistake twice.
Got it. Okay. So what messages would you have, perhaps, for some of the candidates that are coming to Wisconsin, coming out of the convention? Do you think that the candidates are in the field now? Do you think they're going to have to come back to the center? Because I feel like on the Democratic side, perhaps, in Elizabeth Warren, there's Bernie Sanders, too far left. What is your assessment of the field?
What strikes me about the content of the Democratic debates and the kind of questions that are asked and the kind of questions and issues that animate the Democratic base of the party are not the kind of issues that we're going to be talking about after the nominating conventions going into November, Election Day. I mean, kitchen table issues, pocketbook issues, the economy, national security. Of course, we don't know exactly what could happen around the edges. We don't know what could happen to the economy, but the majority of people who are looking at major issues, Democrats and Republicans have totally. The economy is the top issue for Republicans. Healthcare is a top issue for Democrats. Climate change is a big issue for Democrats, especially the progressive base. Republicans, Donald Trump, they're not even talking about it. So I just think the issues that the two candidates, the two nominees, end up debating are going to look remarkably different from the issues that the Democratic primary debates have covered, just because the parties have different priorities in terms of the issues that they want to tackle.
And Rui says that the spirited contest is actually good for any party that this happens to.
It is,
times.
although I have, honestly, the effect of Bernie Sanders really waiting until almost the convention in 2016 and then using that momentum to go back and change the rules after 2016 so that there won't be super delegates allowed to vote in the first round of balloting in the Democratic nominating process. This will be the first time since 1972 that super delegates haven't been allowed to vote in the first round of balloting. And 1972 was a cataclysmic failure for the Democratic Party. Nixon won 50 states essentially for re-election, and I am concerned that moderating process of superdelegates to try to pick a candidate, help select a candidate that can be more viable on a national stage, may ultimately hurt the party.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. Well, as we wrap up, who has been the most challenging interview that you've ever had, and the one person you would really like to interview?
The most challenging interview. Who's the most challenging interview? I have a whole week to just read everything about everyone, so I don't know if anybody's really surprised me because I feel like they can't. I know too much about them. I really spend a lot of time in preparation, so I don't know who has
Maybe
been
somebody
the
who
most
just wouldn't answer your questions.
No, because I just go back and I go back and I go back. I mean, I got all day.
You're
I got all day. And we don't have to cut to commercial. Who wouldn't answer my questions? Look, a lot of Republicans don't want to answer the questions about why they've supported the president or why they've left their sort of principles at the doorstep and become. But
Okay.
Andrew McCabe, Andrew McCabe wouldn't answer my question about whether he opened an investigation into Jeff Sessions, but I just took that as a yes. My favorite interview, I'll tell you, is a man named Brian Stevenson, who is a man from Alabama. Well, he's not from Alabama, but he's been in Alabama for 30 plus years, and he's opened a museum called the Legacy Museum, which is a museum that works to commemorate the history of lynching in the South. And he will be a household name because a major motion Hollywood picture is going to be released about him with Michael P. Jordan starring as him. And he has written this extraordinary book called Just Mercy about the death penalty and mass incarceration. And he was absolutely the one person who's left the set that I thought, gosh, this is a leading light of our generation. And I just felt so fortunate to be able to get to spend time with him and share him with a PBS audience.
So back to your, who would you like to interview?
Who would I like
your
to
dream
have?
interview?
I'd like Serena Williams, right? I'd like, you know, look, I mostly like, I want to have people that are public policy gurus and have ideas, but I also think it's good to mix in people from other walks of life, and when you can get this cross-section of policy and pop culture. And, you know, Serena has some really interesting things to say about being a working mom and how women are treated in sports. And these are issues that are also important to us in a sort of a debate about public discourse and a debate about public policy. Also, just allow me to stretch my muscles because you can't talk about politics all day.
Got it. So Serena Williams, well, maybe she'll be watching on the web. All right. Thank you very much. Margaret Hoover, host of Firing Line. Thank you for being here on 1036.
Portia, thank you.
And again, you can catch any episode of 1036. Just go to MilwaukeePBS.org. You can also check us out on Facebook. Thank you, and we'll see you next month.